بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أعزائي الطلبة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. In this lecture, we shall discuss the physiology of the nervous system. It is well known that the nervous system is one of the important systems in our body, which act together with the endocrine system to control the activity of different systems in our body. The nervous system divided into central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system consists of cranial nerves and spinal nerves, which in turn divided into sensory and the motor divide into somatic and autonomic, and the autonomic divide into sympathetic and parasympathetic. What is important to us in this lecture is the nervous system, and especially the central nervous system and the physiology of the brain. This slide shows to you the graduation of nurse student from the nurse school in Baghdad in 1941. The central nervous system, as I mentioned, consists of a brain, this is the brain, and the spinal cord. The brain is the most complex organ in our body. It plays important roles in a wide varieties of the activities. The unconscious control of the visceral function is one of the important functions of the brain. Other functions include sensory perception, voluntary movements of all skeletal muscles in our body, behavior, emotion, dreams, intelligence, anticipation, judgment, language, memory, and other social and morals behaviors are all the function of the brain, this complex and important organ in our body. Because of its importance, the gut keep it in a bony box, which is the skull or the cranial cavity. The brain is usually divided into four main structures: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, diencephalon, and the brainstem. The most important and the largest part of the brain is the cerebrum, which consists of two hemispheres, right and the left hemisphere, connected with each other by a large band of nerve fiber known as corpus callosum, located in the longitudinal fissure which separates the two hemispheres. This fissure is occupied by a layer of dura mater known as falx cerebri. If you look to the outer surface of the brain, you will see a large number of folds and grooves. These folds are known as gyres, and these grooves are known as sulci. The right hemisphere controls the left side of the body, and the left hemisphere controls the right side of your body. Although the two hemispheres look to be similar anatomically, but functionally, usually one hemisphere is dominant, and this is known as lateralization. In a cross section, the hemisphere, or each hemisphere, consists an outer layer which is a collection of neurons, cells, or soma, or bodies, and known as gray matter. And the inner part is known as white matter, which is a collection of nerve fiber which move up and down the cerebral cortex. Here is the gyres and the fissures or sulci. One of the important sulci in the brain is the central sulci. We shall discuss it later on. Another important sulci is the lateral sulcus, or sometimes known as lateral fissure, which separate the temporal lobe from the frontal and the parietal lobe. In fact, the cerebrum is studied under its 4 lobes. These are the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe, and they are named so depending on the bone of the skull overlying these lobes. The frontal lobe located below the frontal bone, and the parietal lobe below the parietal bone, and the occipital lobe below the occipital bone, and the temporal lobe located in the cranial cavity below the temporal bone. Here are the main lobes: the parietal, occipital, temporal, and the frontal. Again, here is the central sulcus, which separate the primary motor area, this red color, which control the voluntary motor activity of all skeletal muscle, and this is the post-central gyri, which is this primary somatic area where most of the sensory signals are identified or interpreted from different parts of our body. Here is a cross-section, a sagittal section in the brain, showing to us the corpus callosum, the parieto-occipital sulcus or fissure, which separate the occipital lobe from the parietal lobe, the cerebellum, the diencephalon represented by the thalamus and hypothalamus, the midbrain represented by the brainstem, represented by midbrain, pons, and the medulla oblongata. This is the 4 ventricles which separate the cerebellum from the brainstem. This is the lateral ventricles. Each hemisphere had a lateral ventricles which are filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. Now, the frontal lobe of the brain, of the cerebrum, is concerned with all intellectual activities, reasoning, and thought, while the parietal lobe or temporal lobe is concerned mainly with the processing of auditory information, hearing. The sound signals reach this area by the cochlear branch of vestibulocochlear nerves, and here the signals will be interpreted as sounds. The next lobe is the occipital, and this is responsible from the processing of visual information which reach this area by the optic nerves from the retina of the eye. The parietal lobe is responsible from interpretation or integrate the sensory information which again reach to this area by ascending tract, the dorsal column and the spinothalamic tracts. Again, here we see the central fissure or central sulci, and we see the primary motor area just anterior to the central sulcus, and this is the sensory area in the post-central gyri. In fact, in both motor and sensory area, our body are represented in up-down position, and each part of our body represented here according to its importance. Other areas seen in this picture are the Broca's area and the Wernicke area, which are concerned with speaking. Also, we see the secondary sensory area, or primary auditory area, secondary or association auditory area, primary visual area, and secondary visual area or visual association area. Here again, a similar picture: visual area, visual association area, primary sensory area, somatic association area, Wernicke area, auditory area primary, auditory association area, motor area, premotor area, prefrontal area, and the Broca's area. As I mentioned, the outer layer of the cerebrum consists of the gray matter. This is the gray matter which form the cortex of the cerebrum. The deep area of the cerebrum, both hemispheres, are the white matter. Here is the corpus callosum, which connects the two hemispheres. This is the corpus callosum. This is the lateral ventricles. These are the thalamus. Inside the white matter of each cerebrum is a collection of neurons known as the basal ganglia, which consist of caudate nuclei, putamen, and the globus pallidus. The globus pallidus consists of two parts: internal globus pallidus and external globus pallidus. Anatomically, these are the structure of basal ganglia. Associated with basal ganglia are two another area functionally associated with the basal ganglia. These are the subthalamic nuclei and the substantia nigra. This is the subthalamic nuclei. The substantia nigra are not visualized here. The basal ganglia, together with the subthalamic nuclei and the substantia nigra, play important role in starting and in ending and determining the speed of certain motor activity, especially the slow stereotype motor activity like swinging of arm during walking. Damage to the basal ganglia associated with Parkinsonism or Huntington chorea. The next part of the brain is the cerebellum. The cerebellum, located in the posterior cranial cavity below the occipital lobe, posterior to the brainstem, it consists of a central worm-like structure known as vermis and the two hemispheres known as cerebellar hemisphere, and each hemisphere sometimes divided into anterior and posterior lobes. The cerebellum play important role in coordination of muscle activity, balance, and posture and muscle tone. Damage to the cerebellum associated with loss of balance, ataxia, and this is why patients with cerebral damage had poor balance and they cannot control their posture. They also had a special pattern of ataxia or tremor known as cerebellar ataxia. The next part here is the cerebellum, and it is in relation to the cerebrum or occipital lobe and to the brainstem. As I mentioned, the cerebellum separated from the brainstem by 4 ventricles, and again it is contained of outer gray matter and the inner white matter, and in this white matter there is again collection of neurons known as cerebellar nuclei. These nuclei responsible from receiving and discharging the neurons which move in and out cerebellum and connect cerebellum with other part of the brain or the spinal cord. The next part of the brain is the diencephalon. The diencephalon consists of thalamus, hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. As you see here, the thalamus is located below the cerebral hemisphere and in the medial aspect of the hemisphere here, and it is concerned with regulation of some motor activities and motor and memories, but the main function of the thalamus is to act as a relay station for all sensory signals which come from the periphery before they go to the cerebral cortex. Thalamus acts as a relay center for all sensory information from different parts of the body to the cerebral cortex, except smell sensation. As you know, smell sensation is directly go from the cerebriform plate, from the nasal cavity to the cerebroform plate to the cerebrum. Here, the division of the diencephalon, thalamus and hypothalamus, and sometimes we add with it the epithalamus. The thalamus, as I mentioned, acts as a relay center for all sensory input except for smell. Also, as I mentioned, it had some role with arousal and participate in higher mental functions such as memory and emotion. The hypothalamus located just below the thalamus, and it plays an important role in regulation of autonomic nervous system, body temperature, food intake, water balance, sleep and wake cycle, the biological clock, and it also controls the secretion of hormone by controlling the pituitary gland. Also, it acts as a part of limbic system. Brainstem, as I mentioned, is the last part of the brain. It included midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. The main function here is the picture of brainstem, midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, which connect the brain with the spinal cord. This is spinal. Here is the foramen magnum. Through the foramen magnum of the skull, the medulla oblongata connected with the spinal cord. The function of the brainstem collectively is to regulate heart rate, regulate the breathing, because the breathing center are located in the brainstem. The vasomotor center, which regulate the heart rate and the blood pressure, are regulated in the brainstem. Reflex centers are present in the brainstem, like swallowing. Also, it is associated with consciousness due to presence of reticular activating system in the brainstem, and also play certain role in regulation of hormone secretion. The reticular formation is a collection of complex neurons present along the whole length of the brainstem. Look, here is the brainstem, midbrain, pons, and the medulla oblongata. Along the length of the brainstem are the reticular formation. It is mainly receiving signals from all sensory sources, from the eye, from the ear, from the periphery, from the spinal cord, and they send these signals into the brain to keep the brain aroused. It also plays an important role in controlling the muscle contraction together with the cerebral cortex. Also, it controls the facial expression associated with the emotion. Your facial expression when you are angry or happy, when you are sad. It also controls the skeletal muscle tone and the balance, control respiratory muscle, and control the level of consciousness and the wakefulness. Also had something with the endocrine control. Another system which is also important and concerned with the emotional behavior, morale, and with the punishment and the reward is the limbic system. This is a collection of complex cortical and subcortical area present in the medial surface of both cerebral hemispheres. They consist of a large number of areas. The most important one are the cingulate gyrus, hippocampus, hypothalamus, amygdala, parahippocampal gyrus or gyrus. This area or this limbic system concerned with the emotion, visceral response to emotion, motivation, mood, memory, and the sensation of pain and the pleasure. The last topic is the language. As you know, language is the characteristic of a human being, and the God prefers us as a human being over all other animals by specializing this property to us as a human being. ولقد فضلنا بني آدم. واحد من التفاضيل اللغة، بالإضافة إلى النعم الأخرى التي من الله سبحانه وتعالى علينا كعباد كبشر. Language is the ability of the human being to communicate with each other using symbols organized by a system of grammar to describe things and events and to express ideas. The cerebral hemisphere, as I mentioned, we have two cerebral hemispheres, but the control of language usually will be in one hemisphere, and in most people who are right-handed are the language control present in the left hemisphere. In most people, the language centers or control are present in the left hemisphere, and this is called as the dominant hemisphere. The area concerned with the language are the Wernicke area, Broca's area, auditory area, visual area, and the primary motor area. I will repeat them again. Broca's area in the frontal lobe, motor area again in the frontal lobe, auditory area in the temporal lobe, Wernicke area at the junction of occipital, parietal, and the temporal lobe, and also the visual area in the occipital lobes. How we speak, or there are two patterns. When we want to read a sentence from a book, the signals will be carried from the book by the retina of our eyes into the occipital lobe, into the primary visual area. The primary visual area sends the signals of the words which we see in the book to the Wernicke area. Wernicke area will be programmed these signals and send it by fasciculate gyrus to the Broca's area. Broca's area further rearrange these signals and send it to the primary motor area to move the muscle of the tongue, lips, and the larynx in order to pronounce the sentence we see it in the book. However, sometimes a subject or a person asks you a question and you want to answer. In this case, the signals of the sound will be carried by the cochlear branch of the vestibulocochlear nerve into the auditory area in the temporal lobe. From the primary auditory area, again, signals will be passed to the Wernicke area. In Wernicke area, again, the signals of the sounds are programmed and sent by fasciculate gyrus to the Broca's area. Broca's area further arrange these signals and send it to the primary motor area again to move the muscle which is responsible from saying the answer to the subject who asks you a question. وفقكم الله والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.